and where we want to get finished up. All right. This will be a Part C question that may come up in question number 7 about the origins of the Cold War, and they would always try and put it as a formulaic question about where does blame, where does responsibility lie, and generally they will either say it's going to lie with Stalin or Truman or maybe ideology or something like that as well. All right, so we're going to address those questions. Before we do, I want to refer back to what we were talking about containment last lesson, last time that I was here. And so we had the idea that we have different aspects of containment. We have the political, which was announced in the political containment, which was announced in somebody's doctrine.
Truman Doctrine.
Truman Doctrine's political, we're going to support everybody. Economic, which was Marshall Aid. And then eventually it leads to military, which in Europe is the last thing, NATO. All right. Now, what's useful, and this is why I've just changed it slightly up here for you to look at, is when you have any kind of essay to write about any causation in history, you obviously want to avoid writing a chronology, so you need it to be based around argument and based around different terms, different causes, different reasons. The simplest default is simply to have a paragraph each on economic, political, military. You could add social if it's internal. All right, that's your 4 paragraphs. So you go into an examination thinking, what's going to be my default reasons? Well, 1 paragraph on political, 1 paragraph on economic, 1 paragraph on military, 1 paragraph on social. Social here you could probably say is ideological differences, right? That's it. Introduction, conclusion, you're done. All right. I shared this on ManageBack. Did you all get this PowerPoint on ManageBack? Did you all check? Maya's looking nervously at the floor. Did somebody check on ManageBack that I got it? That it was on ManageBack?
I saw the post, I didn't check.
I don't know these people. What's it all about? And then I also added links to that podcast that I told you about. Listen to that. It's very, very good. All right. Did anybody listen to that?
I started it, but I didn't get to finish it.
Okay. It's very good. No? Did you like it? Yeah, it's excellent. They've added another episode, at least 1 episode since, on Kristallnacht. All right, Night of the Long Broken Glass. All right, so we want to be able to look at that too. This whole chapter that we're looking at is in your textbooks, and is the chapter which is this chapter, which is chapter 4. All right, and particularly today when we're looking at who's most to blame, is basically on page 98. You can sort of like use that for your notes as well. But essentially this is all chapter 4. And we're going to look at who is most responsible for the First World War. We're going to start off by Stalin. Alright, we're going to start off by asking how far can Stalin be blamed for it. And then we're going to look at the responsibility of the USA. In general terms, there's more personal responsibility laid at Stalin because he lives in a dictatorship. He is a dictator. So he is one who has complete control of policy. So while the president has... You're right. All right. While the president... You're shaking. I'm unused to people shaking in fear.
No, not...
So as long as you're not scared, that's the very most important thing. All right. As long as the president has power, they're not the only ones with that sort of power. So we're going to look at ways in which Stalin can be held responsible, and then look at ways in which he can be defended, because you need to give both sides of both sides. All right, you need to give both sides. Okay, so let's have a look in which ways he can be blamed for the Cold War. All right. So number 1 here, we've got he didn't stick to the agreements at Yalta. Now we can say, as we will say later on, that those agreements at Yalta were kind of fudged. They were sort of like unusual. All right. But he didn't stick to those agreements, and therefore that's the origins of the disputes. And because of that, he was seen as being untrustworthy. You need to make a statement, and then you need to add an analysis to it. So Stalin did not stick to the agreements at Yalta. People will say that. All right, that's great. That's true. We all know that that's true. That's wonderful. What does that mean, though? Well, that means that people don't trust him. So by adding that, and so this means people didn't trust him, or meant the United States became suspicious of his motives, that's your analysis on top of it. That's what gets you A and B. Simply saying he didn't stick to agreements at Yalta, that's going to get you a C. But by adding to it, by saying this meant that people became suspicious of his motives, that's what gets you an A and B. He created Comecon. Well, this was to ensure that they had control over the economies of Eastern Europe, and more particularly, they overthrew the Czechoslovak government even when it thought about getting martial aid. So they basically take over Eastern Europe. This is not a nice thing to be able to do. You look at the governments, you look at the difference between the countries that were occupied and the governments of the countries that were occupied by the Soviet Union compared to those liberated by the British and the Americans. The British and the Americans gave back the governments to the government that existed before they were taken over by the Nazis. The Soviets imposed their own government. Alright? So, the Belgian government, the Dutch government, the Danish government, the Norwegian government, the Luxembourg government, all of these governments which were occupied by the Germans in 1940, their original governments go back, and the British and the Americans leave them to it. Alright? France is slightly different because they obviously surrendered to the Germans, so there was going to be a new government anyway, but the Free French, they were still organically arose from France, cosmopolitan France, de Gaulle and the other leaders. Right? They were not appointed by Roosevelt and by Churchill. Roosevelt and Churchill hated de Gaulle. All right, they genuinely hated him. But he was still the leader of the French people, so they accepted him. All right, Italy was a combatant state, so therefore slightly different. But they respected the governments of those countries that they took over, whereas the Soviet Union, they just imposed control. So that's where we have Stalin to blame for this as well. All right, going to him personally, he saw the world in terms of ideology. All right, that there was an inevitable conflict between communism and capitalism. And this is his fundamental big mistake that he makes. Because he's being a communist, he thinks he's going to win. Remember that the essence of communism is that it is a science. That history is a science. And that communism is inevitably going to happen. Alright? And the idea of Bolshevism, of Lenin and Stalin, particularly Lenin, was we push it forward. So Stalin's looking through this lens, communism is going to happen, and that history goes in cycles, right? So he looks at what happened in the aftermath of World War One. Well, Russia went communist. Germany very nearly went communist. Hungary goes communist for a bit. That was in 1940. That was after 4 years of World War One, and then afterwards there was a massive economic depression. So, after World War II, an even bigger conflict than World War One. Surely, therefore, history repeats itself. Communism is inevitable. Communism is going to happen. All right. What was Russia last time? Germany nearly this time. Surely means it's going to be Germany this time. Maybe also France and Italy. It's going to happen. There will be an economic depression. Of course, there's going to be an economic depression. There always is after a war. This is breeding grounds for communism. Communism's going to win. I've won. He's doing a little communist dance. Let's call it a communist party. Communist party. Right, he's having a communist. He's having a communist party. He does. Now, what's really bad about this? Not bad about this. The mistake I think he makes in this is that he therefore is too complacent. All right, he's too complacent. I can sit back and relax. All right, because I'm going to win. Communism's going to win. So he automatically sees a conflict that's going to develop, and he thinks he's going to win. All right. When he suddenly realizes he needs to start doing things because the West are responding to what's happening in Germany, he then sets up Cominform, the Communist Information Bureau, the Comintern again, which was designed to spread revolution. So this is clearly a signal that he intended to undermine capitalism, undermine the governments of the West. So there's a reason why the West said before we give you aid and things in World War II, you need to get rid of Comintern. All right. John Lewis Gaddis, and I mentioned him before, and I didn't realise I had up there, This is, particularly if you're doing IB, I might share with you, is this different chapters? No, because this is what I use for doing it for IB really. The best single volume on the Cold War, full stop, is this book. Alright, it's way in advance of what you need to do for GCSE. It's more of an in-depth for IB, but this is the single. This is what I refer to when I want to make notes on it. Alright, John Lewis Gaddis. Alright, he is the doyen, the expert on where it comes to Cold War history. Okay, he's like the #1 expert. You cannot mention any Cold War history without talking about his work. All right, and this is a concise version. The big one is like huge, but this is the concise new history about the Cold War from beginning to end, and talks about how it all happened. And is basically where I steal a lot of everything that I know is from that book. All right, and Gaddis's points. And remember, we talked about this last time. He's like knee deep in the Soviet archives and stuff. He's got all of the information from that and seeing that. And what he makes the point is that Stalin's personality, paranoid, narcissistic as well, reflects Soviet policy. So because of Stalin's personality, because of the nature of the one-party state of communism, Stalin's personality reflects Soviet policy. Far more so than would a Truman or a Roosevelt or an Eisenhower affect US policy. And he says two things in particular: his paranoia, everybody's out to get him, and his narcissism. What does narcissism mean?
Like self-obsession.
Yeah, where does it come from? Do you know the origin of the word?
Narcissus.
Yes, and what does he do?
He looks at his reflection in the water
and dies.
Yes. There you go. See, I like words that have the origins of words in like stories. So narcissist is actually, this is a brilliant thing, because narcissist, that word is actually a metaphor.
Like?
No, it's a metaphor, because it's basically saying you're like narcissist. Yeah.
Oh.
It's a word, but it's also it's a verb or whatever. I never know which was the right thing to say, but it's actually a verb that's a metaphor. All right. So, are we okay with that? How can we defend him? Let's defend Stalin. That's a great job, that is. I'm going to defend Stalin.
That'd be hard.
So we can say he's got legitimate security concerns. He's got legitimate security concerns regarding Germany and Poland. Russia's been to war with Germany 2 times in the last 30 years, and they've all invaded through Poland. Yeah, so this is the ultimate problem: is you cannot reconcile the understandable Soviet need for security with democracy, because the Poles don't like the Russians, and they never will. All right, it will be a problem tomorrow. It's a problem today. Which country in the world is building up its armed forces more than any other at this literal moment in time is Poland. Right? Poland's pretty much doubled, tripled its military expenditure because it's seen what's happening in Ukraine, and Poland is next to Ukraine, right? So Poland and Russia, right, will never, when there's a Poland-Russia football match, it's not pleasant. All right, it's not pleasant. One time when Scotland played Russia, Scotland's famous for whiskey. All right, they had a famous banner. It's 1982 World Cup, height of the Cold War. Communism versus alcoholism. It's 82 World Cup. So,
That much.
not the Scots. That's not that good.
When in doubt, alcoholism it out. Alcoholism is never the answer.
Ironically, one of the things that they had to do, one of the things that Gorbachev probably would do when we look at the end of communism, is actually one of the reasons is alcoholism. The whole system, economy just stops, and is brought to Gorbachev comes in to make changes to the economy, and part of the reason is lots of people have days off work because they are alcoholic and are drinking so much homebrew vodka, and they drink it themselves, they make it themselves, and it's terrible. And if they run out of it, they use antifreeze. and die.
Did Pepsi also get involved in Russian economy at some
Didn't
point?
Pepsi become the highest military?
Yeah, because they
Oh
got
yeah, there was a thing
involved.
because they yes, there was that thing for a while.
Paid in arm.
They paid in
Yeah,
yes.
they're like, okay, you give us Coke and
But
we give you military.
What
And you're like, okay.
what I will do is I will show you the beautiful, which summarizes to me, perfectly summarizes the end of the Cold War, which is a Pizza Hut advert. I will say no more than that. I might show it to you at the end of the lesson actually, but it summarizes, it just perfectly illustrates the end of the Cold War, and actually the humiliation of the Soviets in that actually. The next one, the Soviet Union has suffered far more than the USA. The phrase that the World War II was won by the British, the Americans, and the Russians. The British gave the time that was needed to win the war. The Americans gave the money, the resources that was needed to win the war, and the Russians gave the blood to win the war. Is absolutely true. All right, most of the fighting was on the Eastern Front. Soviet Unions, in terms of lives and in terms of economy and industry, but particularly like suffered more than anybody else. Okay, so we can say, or some people might say, that Stalin was right to mistrust the West. He was waiting for the second front. It didn't happen. He was never really told about the atomic bomb. All right, the American, well, particularly the British developed the first proper computer in Bletchley Park to crack German Enigma codes. A film called Enigma.
There's like one with Benedict Cumberbatch, the Invitation Game.
Yes. And so, but none of this was shared with the Soviet Union. They didn't share the fact that we'd broken the codes with the Soviet Union. So, maybe that's a way of trust. The other side is that there was a huge shift. Oh, one thing here. Let's talk about a second front. This is where Stalin's kind of wrong, but also if you were Stalin, it's the same thing with the Nazi Munich and at Munich. Remember, or after Munich, Stalin assumes that the British and the French are trying to get the Germans to fight Russia, because that's exactly what Stalin would do if he was them. And kind of makes sense, really, from their perspective. It's certainly better than ended up fighting Germany by themselves. He therefore believes that the British and the Americans are working together, delaying the second front deliberately so that the Soviet Union does most of the fighting, by which time they come in at the end, pretty much like the Americans did in World War One, and go, ha, we've won the war, when they've actually done very, very little. The Americans in World War One did very, very little, but got all the glory afterwards. All right, so he's kind of assuming that they would do the same again. Two misconceptions. One is Stalin. Well, actually, that's what Stalin would do. Kind of makes sense. Probably not a bad strategy, really. All right, and the other thing is he sees the capitalists, the British and the Americans, as one, capitalists. Whereas actually, the Americans are getting really pissed off with the British because the British keep delaying and delaying and delaying. The Americans want a second front. They want to go to fight. They want to go and fight a second front. The British don't. The British want to avoid a second front. The British have been humiliated in 1940. They only have one army left. The British are at the end of their resources. Right? They've got one army left. That army they've already lost one army in France. They get a second army over there, and that loses. And D-Day's a disaster. Britain has nothing. It literally has nothing. So Britain's kind of like, we don't really want to do that. So this shows his misapprehension of it all, because he sees them as one monolith, whereas actually they're not. They're actually, the Americans are on this point are on the side of the Russians against the British. So that's one of his, shows how his personality intrudes. This I think is a true one, and I think this is the security concerns. Yes, this one certainly. There's a big difference, and this is really where the Americans can be to blame. There's a big difference between Roosevelt and Truman. Huge difference. And actually, the person I personally say is responsible for the Cold War is Roosevelt. I like going against what current people say is what is true. And Roosevelt is the worst president. He causes the Cold War because nobody knows what he's doing. He doesn't share it with Truman, his vice president. Truman only becomes his vice president in 1944. All right. So in the 1944 election. So he only starts being vice president in January of 1945. So he has no idea what's happening. Roosevelt doesn't involve him. He only gets him on a ticket because he needs Midwest, and he also gets him on a ticket because his previous vice president, who, forgive me, I can't remember his name, his previous vice president was very probably a communist spy, or at very least a communist sympathizer. Right? So there's a big change between the two, and Roosevelt's administration does have a lot of communists in it. But what this means is, more importantly, Roosevelt probably makes, and again we don't really know because there are a lot of one-to-one meetings, makes a lot of personal, what's the word I'm searching for here? Agreements or nods and winks with Stalin to say, yeah, no, we'll sort this out later. All right, I need to get through this. His thing was as well, particularly over Poland, was in the election in November of 1944. In those Midwest states, because he's standing for a fourth time, and people are like, really? And he's also old and he's actually dying. So he's also dying at this point and knows he's dying. Okay? And his brain still kind of works. Not like Joe Biden, but his brain does still kind of work. All right? So he should be there like, guys. But he's like, no, I am indispensable. Everybody should follow what I'm doing. I am indispensable. But nobody knows what's following on from him. So in the Midwest election, there's lots of Polish people there. He needs their votes. They generally vote Democrat. He's a Democrat. He needs their votes. If he says, Poland, bye-bye, it's going to the Russians, at Yalta,
then he's going to lose all
makes it look like before the election, before November, they're not going to vote for him. All right? So you can maybe see why Stalin has a contempt for democratic politicians. But this is the key difference. He's again, like I just said about the difference between the British and the Americans. Stalin sees it as a monolith. You are capitalists because according to his thing, yeah, you're the president, but the puppets are like the big guys in the top hats and dollar bills coming out over here, smoking big fat cigars, going rah, workers, rah. All right, that's how the communist view of the world is. Right, they are the Illuminati of capitalism in the back. Right, telling them what to do. The World Economic Forum as we have it today. It's quite scary, maybe they probably are. All right, but there we go. So that's what he thinks. Then we also have, as we get more into it, all right, and against this would be what the Cold War's already kind of started by then, but anyway, is the Marshall Plan. This is dollar imperialism. This is really trying to facilitate the US takeover of national economies. All right, so in the same way that we've had a political takeover, at least a political takeover is open, it's honest, it's above board. All right, we're now the People's Republic of Czechoslovakia. All right, it's all there above board. All right, whereas the Marshall Plan is just sneaky because it's actually undermined. You can't actually see it politically. It's all dressed up as being free, but actually the reality is it's controlled by the rich. It's controlled by the dollars. All right, so that's dollar imperialism. Okay, I love Egypt. So we won't do what you think. That's what we would do if we were having a lesson. In what ways was the US likely to blame? All right, so basically two main reasons here. One is US policy is designed to create global free markets, dollar imperialism. If you want to go all the way back throughout US history, this is a recurring theme of US history, what's called an open door policy. Okay, famously set up with Commander, I can't remember his name, Matthew somebody, who rocked up in a Navy destroyer to Japan, Kyoto Harbor, I think. Or actually, ironically, it might be Hiroshima, but I don't think it is. That would be quite ironic. And said to the Japanese, you need to open up trade to American and Western European imports. Otherwise, we will attack you and invade you and blow you up. And so the Japanese opened up their economy. Actually, the Japanese were very clever. The Japanese said, right, we've seen what powers the West has. We need to sort our stuff out very quickly. And so they instituted a whole range of changes, which I'm very tempted to go off at a tangent because it's one of my first year university history courses was a comparison between the UK and Japan, islands of a continent. Yeah, UK's island of Europe, Japan's an island of Asia. What's the similarities and differences between them? That was one of my first year economic courses, history courses. So it's dollar imperialism, and that's what they do. So what 3 examples can we give to support this? Well, number one, they end Lend-Lease in 1945, which the Soviet Union is depending on. They also do it to the British, which really is the main reason, one of the main reasons why Britain's bankrupt in 1947. The British expect them to do that. And actually this stabs the British in the back far more than it stabs the Americans in the back. Marshall Aid, obviously, is the big one. We can also say Bisonia and the Deutschmark. Yeah, and this is the significant one as well when it comes to Germany, right? This is clear economic imperialism trying to take over Germany. And remember, this is the big button to press. You know, this is Joseph Stalin's sensitive area. In fact, Khrushchev will actually refer to Berlin as being the testicles of the West. He says, if I want to hurt the West, I squeeze Berlin. That's from Khrushchev. He was a guy who had kick me stuff on his back, and they used to put tomatoes in his pockets. Yes, good old Khrushchev. Oh, we need to see the death of Stalin, don't we? So that's that one. So that's how we can say what's to blame. The US policy was influenced, not to the same degree as Stalin because of the nature of the system, but was influenced by personalities like Truman. And Truman is to blame because he was naive and aggressive in foreign policy. Alright, he was aggressive with Molotov, old iron bum. Alright, he said, I'm tired of babying the Russians. Alright. He was quite aggressive because he had the nuclear monopoly, the atomic monopoly, so that gave him the confidence, doesn't matter, there's a war, I'm not going to lose, I can just nuke you. So that gave him that sort of arrogance and aggression towards the Russians. This was seen in Truman Doctrine and Marshall Aid. There is definitely a change of personality, and a change of personality has a big difference. Has a difference in how it's done. All right, we can see that, you know, Trump, Biden, whoever is going to, goodness me, I can't believe this ridiculous choice of 2 people, but there you go. Just the mere fact of different personalities is going to completely change relationships with different countries. All right, so personality does have a big impact in this as well. All right, so this is which ways we can say the US is to blame, dollar imperialism. And Truman's being aggressive. Calling him naive, I think, is a bit patronising. All right, he is a US senator. He wasn't experienced in foreign affairs. All right, he wasn't experienced in foreign policy, which is true. Again, Roosevelt chose him. He chose him because of that, so Roosevelt could just do foreign policy. Right, he chose him for that reason. So again, the blame sort of lies with Roosevelt for his reasons. If he knew this was going to be such a big thing, he should have got a deputy who was ready to take over, who knew about such things. How can we defend? How can we defend? Well, Stalin's viewpoints, attitudes towards, like, the London Poles, to the London Poles and Eastern Europe illustrate his desire to break agreements. You can't really trust Stalin. Actually, Truman, we're saying he's aggressive and all of this sort of stuff. It takes 2 years before he actually formulates policy. Yeah, he might be sort of like a bit more abrupt, a bit more brusque. He might be a little bit more Mr. Richard in dealing with Stalin. But it still takes 2 years to come up to a policy. So he's thought about it, and it's actually, he takes on, although he hasn't experience in foreign policy, he basically copies and pastes who's his name? In the Soviet
Telegram.
Yes, the Telegram guy. What's his name?
George.
You started with G.
George?
Mr. X.
No.
Yes, Kennan. Yeah, George Kennan. Right? Who's basically the #1 foreign policy expert in Moscow embassy. So he actually listens to advisors. That's generally considered a good thing. So he does that. You actually look at what happened, that, as I said, the countries that the United States occupied, they're free countries. Their governments are free. Whereas and they can choose their political and economic systems, whereas countries in Eastern Europe not so much. You could also say that Truman Doctrine, containment is defensive. It's not actually trying to change anything. In fact, its whole point is not to change anything, but to maintain the status quo. That's its whole point. So that's how we can defend the role of the United States. Study of writings. What do you think? I did that last time, so this is what I want you to do now. You're supposed to give me some piece of work last week, but I was very sick and you got away with that. I want it this week, but this is a very important essay. I want you to take a photo of this. This is for next week.
That we submitted? No,
Yeah.
that we submitted.
Yeah,
I need to add it on. Oh, you're just blaming me now, aren't you? I don't know. This is outrageous. Yeah, I need to put it on managed back. All right. So it's how far we're standing today. What was the other one?
It was about like what Russia did in Eastern Europe, how they took
Oh,
over.
Soviet takeover of Eastern Europe. Yeah, my bad.
We can do that.
Yeah, we did the points. We just had
You
to
might
take
do
it.
closer. Thank you.
I could just post it on Discord if you guys want.
Do you have a photo?
Yeah, I do.
That is so patronising. All right, I want to show you. Can you take a picture? Have you got a picture? You got this written down?
Oh, she's showing it.
Okay, take a picture quickly. Right, this sums up the end of the Cold War perfectly. Oh, there we go. What have you got there? You've got that there, you've got that there. Okay. That was my thing that I was taking to today. I want Pizza Hut. Gorbachev. This sums up Gorbachev. Have you done Gorbachev?
Yeah.
A bit? Right, this sums up the end of the Cold War. This is 1997. Poor Gorbachev. This is also what happens to the guy. Single-handedly probably saved the world from destruction, right? This is how he ends up. This is sad, comic, tragic.
Pizza?
Pizza Hut.
Это Горбачев.
Горбачев.
Это из-за него у нас в экономике бардак.
Благодаря ему у нас новые возможности.
Это из-за него у нас политическая нестабильность.
Да благодаря ему у нас свобода,
Полный хаос.
перспективы.
Политическая нестабильность.
Да благодаря ему у нас есть Пизахат.
За Горбачева!
За Горбачева! Sometimes nothing brings people together like a nice hot pizza from Pizza Hut.
That summarizes totally the end of the Cold War. Alright, and the triumph of capitalism over communism. And it's also how a great man, one of the people who saved the world, saved millions of lives, potential lives, World War III, single-handedly ended World War III, is reduced to that. It's tragic. I mean, I'm laughing. I've seen it many times. I'm like crying with laughter. But that, it's beautiful. But it's tragic and it's funny.
That's depressing.
It's wonderful.
No, what makes it even more depressing is that you have shots of like a great Russian architecture in the background, and then you just to pizza. Like you see the domes and the spires.
Yes.
Pizza.
But it doesn't matter. We have Pizza Hut. Well done, Gorbachev.
Gorbachev. We have Pizza Hut.
But Domino's is better though.
Yeah, no, it's not even a very good pizza. It's not even proper pizza. There you go. On that literal bombshell. Nothing sums up the Cold War better than that. Glory.
I just want to ask, for English we go to the study room, right?
No, you probably go to. I don't know.
No,
Because
Mr.
Yeah, because the
No, 'cause you
teachers
went
were
all
saying
fit.
that they can't go to their classroom because they're having the oral